My mom told me not to hang out with people like you. In the middle of my 4th grade cafeteria, my best friend at the time, let's call her Haley, looked me in the eyes and said, "My mom told me not to hang out with people like you." And I knew what she meant by people like you. You see, I come from a family of Haitian immigrants. My mom, my brother, and I moved to the US from Haiti in 2010 after the Haitian earthquake. And since then, we'd gotten plenty of comments like that from strangers who made assumptions about who we were based on stereotypes about Haitian people or immigrants, or more often, both. But to hear that coming from someone I considered a friend felt like a punch in the gut. And the thing is that Haley had known that I was an immigrant. I mean, I showed up halfway through 3rd grade, barely speaking any English. I wonder what she expected. But I guess she didn't know what it meant for someone to be an immigrant until her mom clarified. I'd met Haley's mother the day before at a family potluck, and when she overheard me speaking Haitian Creole to my mom, she gave us a look of such disdain and contempt that I recognized even as a 10-year-old. She didn't know me, and she didn't know my family, but there she was, staring at us as if we'd done her a personal injustice. Over the years, after I left 5th grade, that's what I looked like, I came to recognize that look. It was on kids' faces when they asked me if I was super poor in Haiti, or if it was as dirty and as violent as they'd heard. They wouldn't associate themselves with me because they assumed my family practiced voodoo. Not that there's anything wrong with those who do, but I was actually raised Catholic. But that's all they knew of Haiti, and all they knew of my identity. As I came into my preteen years, I started to internalize the way people were treating me. Because so many kids, so many American kids, had made assumptions about who I was based on whatever stereotypes they knew of, I started to think that all Americans would treat me that way. I thought that they'd always be rude and judgmental and standoffish, and I stopped trying to befriend the kids at school, which was just as well. They didn't like me anyway. But then, when I started at a different school in 7th grade, and I eventually had to talk about my background, I was surprised to find that the kids, these girls, my own age, 12 and 13 maybe, weren't judgmental. They asked me about my background out of curiosity, not judgment, and they genuinely wanted to hear me out, to let me tell my story, and show them who I was, rather than assume who I might be based on stereotypes. I remember once talking to this group of girls about the Haitian origins of my middle name, Lishmaina, and rather than dismissing it as weird or ugly, as most kids had done, they took on the task of learning to pronounce it correctly. Something so small meant a lot to me because no one had done it before. Even my friends' parents, who really had no obligation to hear me out, if they overheard me speaking Haitian Creole to my mom or my brother, they would ask me if I was bilingual, and what language was I speaking, and where was my family from, and how long had I been here. They made an attempt to get to know me. So then I started to rethink my cultivated belief that all Americans would be rude and judgmental. These people at my new school were open-minded, and they were different, and they refuted that belief. Their questions, although mildly intrusive, were in an attempt to get to know me. And I realized that if they were willing to hear me out, to let me tell my story, despite all the misinformation that the media provided about Haiti and immigrants, then I had to be able to do the same for other people. For several years, I held on to this, and it served me well. I got to know people really quickly, simply because I was willing to withhold judgment, to hear them out, to let them explain to me why they believed the things that they did. And the more it worked, the more I believed in it. Then, after the 2016 elections, my faith in withholding judgment and hearing people out was challenged. I became more quick to anger because it felt like to be Black and female and an immigrant, or really in any marginalized or disadvantaged community in Trump's America, was to be constantly under attack. It was as if, suddenly, people felt that they had permission to forget that people who were different than them, who had different identities than they did, were still people and still deserved rights and respect and justice. If the president, the leader of this country, could treat people and talk about people like that, people like me like that, then what was stopping everybody else? It felt like whatever rights I had had before were being ripped away from me. So I held on to my identities like an armor, and I got more actively involved in feminism and immigration reform and LGBTQ+ rights, anyone who I felt was being robbed of their humanity in Trump's America. It became harder and harder for me to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I often went on the offensive, more ready to argue than to listen. My faith and belief in withholding judgment was slipping. I didn't realize this until I got into an argument with one of my coworkers just this past summer about feminism. He made a joke about how he thought all feminists were feminazis, and he looked at me like he expected me to laugh, but needless to say, I didn't find it funny, and I got defensive and we started arguing. He was talking about how he thought that feminists were just man-haters and that women should just be happy with their place in society, that the situation just wasn't that bad. The more we talked, the more provoked I got, and I felt disrespected and attacked to have my beliefs thrown right back in my face. And I thought, who was this random boy to tell me what I should and should not believe? That he was clearly just ignorant and wrong. But then he said, "You're not even listening to me. That's what's wrong with this whole feminist thing. Y'all already think you're right, and you're not willing to listen to anybody else." And this gave me pause. He was right. I wasn't listening to him, and I hadn't given him the chance to explain. Where was my belief in withholding judgment and hearing people out? Did it stop being true because I felt disrespected and attacked? Did it stop being true because I was certain I was right? Did it stop being true because he wasn't listening either? I wanted the answer to be yes. I was angry, and I didn't feel like the person I was talking to was worthy of my attention, compassion, or time. But wasn't that the way Haley and her mom had treated me? I realized that in the whole lunch period that we had been arguing, we had gotten nowhere. And if anything, at this point, I had forgotten that I was talking to someone with their own story to share, and I was treating this boy as if he were the whole patriarchy incarnated. And that wasn't fair. Just because he was treating me the same way didn't make it right. So I took a step back, and I took a deep breath, and collected my thoughts. I was still angry, and I wanted him to hear me out. I wanted him to understand where I was coming from. But just shouting at each other wasn't going to get us anywhere. So instead, I asked him calmly, "Why don't you believe in feminism?" And he must have sensed the shift in my tone because he answered calmly. He told me that there were very few feminists in his personal life. And he told me that what he knew of feminism was mostly from social media, and that the feminists on social media were often the loudest and most argumentative and abrasive of the movement. I realized as we talked that he had based his whole belief on feminism based solely on what he had seen on social media. So then I started to explain why I believed in feminism, especially Black feminism. I told him that it was important to me to fight the ways that classism and racism and gender identity intersected with sexism to keep women, especially women of color and Black women, at the bottom. I told him that feminism gave me hope, that if I had a daughter, her world would look different than mine. Talking to him made him seem more human to me, that he wasn't a bad person. He just had the wrong, or I guess he had different information. I think people connect with honesty and vulnerability. In difficult conversations, topics relating to race, class, gender, etc., we tend to pick a side. And once we have, we're no longer willing or open to listening to anybody else. We demonize the opposition, and we forget to see them as human, that they're people. We only have to look at any currently divisive topic on any social media platform to find thousands of people arguing with one another, but not really listening to each other. An argument on Facebook might look a little something like that. Just thousands of people yelling at each other, but not really listening to each other, or maybe using all caps, because they think that makes them look smarter, I don't know. But in any case, even right now, with the post-midterm elections, people are worried that because one branch of the government is Democratic and the other is Republican, that no one is going to be willing to cross the aisle to figure out what we have in common and find a way forward. But I think that if we're open and we're willing to be vulnerable with people that we disagree with, and if we take the time to understand what experiences inform people's beliefs, then we humanize each other. It feels unfair to have to talk to and to listen to someone who you feel has disrespected you or your identity. It feels like they don't deserve your attention, compassion, or time. And it certainly hurts if you try to talk to them anyway, but they don't seem to recognize you as a human being deserving of rights and justice. And perhaps it is unfair, but it's important that we do it anyway, because the way that we allow violence to happen to other people is that we forget to see them as human. We forget that they're capable of hurting. But by taking the time to understand one another, to engage in real conversation, not just wait for our turn to talk, then we humanize each other and we can find common ground and figure out a way to move forward. It's only a first step, but we have to start somewhere. So if I were to go back to 4th grade, to when Haley told me, to my face, that she doesn't want to be friends with an immigrant anymore, rather than letting her walk away, rather than deciding that she wasn't worth my time, rather than never speaking to her again for the rest of elementary school, I would ask her why, and I would listen to her answer. Thank you.